I traveled to Israel with a group of 40 from the JCC Association. That's the JCC's umbrella organization around the country. There were 40 of us and about 8 execs like me of JCC's individual. There were about 4 or 5 people from the JCCA staff. That association, which we are obviously members, has 2 people full-time, maybe more than 2 at this point, in Israel. So it was very advantageous if you're planning a trip to Israel, you have people on the ground who know a lot of speakers, a lot of places to go, etc. Even though most of us, I think, would know where we're going to go if you're following the news about what's happened since October 7th. So in a time like this, going to Israel is standing in solidarity with the Israeli people. Now, I assume there are many people in this crowd that have been to Israel before. And maybe some of you have been there during crises. Unfortunately, there have been many of them in history. I was there during the Second Intifada. This was my 8th trip to Israel. And I felt during this time frame when there was an opportunity to go to Israel, I know what it meant to the Israeli people to show up, right, when no one else is going. So that kind of really motivated me to go. That was my first and really only thought. Well, my other thought was, boy, I don't like traveling there, how far it is. Being there was not the issue, but it is, I couldn't get a direct flight from Boston. Went to New York, so I think we're talking 20-some hour journey, but it's well worth it, and it was quite powerful. But when I got there, one of the first people we met, well, the first person we met was former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. Actually, I'm going to digress already, because for me, I think it's funny, some of what you hear, and you know, Jews, and most of the people in the room are Jews. You know, we learn to laugh when maybe we should be crying, and we cry when, and so forth. So I'm sitting in the front row, and he was the first person, Naftali Bennett, former Prime Minister, maybe future Prime Minister of Israel. And I asked the last question. It was about Iran. And then the person running the session said, well, that's a complicated question. And Bennett answered, he said, no, I want to answer it in a few words. So Bennett said to me after he answered the question, well, I could tell now, because we had to announce where we were from. When you asked the question, he goes, well, I can tell you're from Boston. I'm sure you're laughing because you know I don't sound like I'm from Boston. So I said to him, no, I'm from Brooklyn, Prime Minister. So as someone said, that's like Larry David telling the Prime Minister he got the accent wrong. But he was actually pretty amazing, and he may well be the future Prime Minister. So the second part of besides solidarity is bearing witness, right? Bearing witness. And to bear witness doesn't mean just that you're there and you see it. It means when you go home. So the other politician we met was Yitzhak Herzog, the current president of the state of Israel. In this beautiful residence, he did look kind of tired and exhausted, as one can imagine. And we were asking questions of him. And probably after the first question, the second question, he said, I want to ask you something to the questioner. What are you going to do when you go back? On the theme of bearing witness. And frankly, I would ask the same question to everyone in the room. And hopefully, we're going to have time for Q&A. You're going to hear a little bit of a presentation, what I saw. But that's what I feel my mission, and what I'd like to hope that everyone here begins to feel a little bit of responsibility, even if it's if you hear something that doesn't make sense. And in the past, I know many of us, we're a little quiet, we don't want to have confrontation, no one likes confrontation. You don't have to get angry, but you can straighten out misinformation and maybe say a little bit what you heard from here and read a little more and so forth. So we're going to start with a little context. Again, for this group, it may not be necessary. I know the word context now doesn't ring the same way it did prior to a few weeks ago. So again, the slide on the right with an arrow, and I think we have a pointer, is Israel. I mean, we know Israel is the size of New Jersey, but until you see it surrounded by the other countries, you don't quite get that, right? So on the left, you see Gaza, right there in the corner. And of course, you see the West Bank, you see Egypt, the Negev, but it's right there on the coast, and it was once held by Egypt. So the sense of insecurity, just think about it in general. If you're that size and you're surrounded by that, hostile nations, you're going to feel pretty insecure. So when you sit in Newton or you sit in Marblehead and you begin to judge Israeli actions maybe as being disproportionate, too aggressive, well, sit in those living rooms. Well, we'll get to that a little bit. So there are 9.1 Israelis, 81% are Jewish. Most of you probably know Israel pulled out completely in 2005 out of Gaza. It dragged people out of Gaza. And they left behind small factories, industry, especially a flour industry. And in 2006, Hamas was actually elected by the people in Gaza. And if you've looked at surveys today, it's hard to believe the people in Gaza, probably about 70% still support Hamas, and a higher percentage supports Hamas on the West Bank. Hard to believe, right, that those numbers still exist. So in 2007, Hamas took over. They threw some of the PA off of roofs in the battle with the Palestinian Authority, and they, in short order, started lobbing rockets over the border, which actually surprised me because at the time, and many of you remember this, well, I think a lot of us said, let's see. Let's kind of see. Maybe we'll have peace. We're going to pull out. What are we doing in Gaza? It's not really that biblical. We should get out. And Ariel Sharon, a right-winger, agreed, and he pulled people out. But I expected there would be a harsh response after they pulled out, but there wasn't. And we've seen years of wars, skirmishes, and so forth. I have to point out that there are billions of dollars now is under a spotlight lately because of what's happening with UNRWA and the United Nations. That they're funneling, and they have been funneling, and I'm not going to get into a whole discussion of UNRWA. Maybe someone wants to ask about it, but I will say that the Palestinians are the only people on earth, the only refugees, in which one generation after you're displaced, you're considered refugees. No other group on earth. They're expected to settle in other countries. They're no longer refugees. The Palestinians are still refugees from 1948. So now we'll take a look at who is Hamas. Right? So this is right from the Hamas charter. And I'm going to read it because it speaks volumes. Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it. The hour of judgment shall not come until the Muslims fight the Jews and kill them, so that the Jews hide behind the trees and stones, and each tree and stone will say, O Muslim, O servant of Allah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him, except for the Garquat tree, for it is the tree of the Jews. That's the enemy. That's Hamas. They say this, the whole world knows this. It's in print, it's in English. Their intent is clear, to eliminate Israel. They have never mentioned, and they won't mention, how about a two-state solution? They don't talk about a two-state solution. The Jews don't deserve a state. There is no discussion from Hamas. In fact, someone just showed me in January, so if you say, well, the charter is old, it's dusty, just in January, Khalid Mashal, who is the Hamas main political figure outside of Gaza, he said, there's no way. We're not going to talk about a two-state solution. That's not what we want. So the chants that you see on TV, maybe on some channels more than others, we've all heard it, from river to the sea. So the river to the sea, Karen is pointing it out, hopefully you can see it, right? The sea is obviously in the Mediterranean, right? The river is the Jordan, right there. So everything from the Jordan on the west to the east is from river to the sea. I think one of our Congress people actually has a sign outside our office saying the same thing. Beyond the depravity that we've all heard, and we'll go into a little bit, it's really startling, even with that they actually celebrated it. They took pictures of what they did, videos. Of course, there's a famous phone call to a terrorist's mother. Look, Mom, I killed 10 Jews. And we're not talking about people with weapons or men or other men. We're talking about a lot of women and children. So on the next slide, we heard this from one of the speakers when I was in Israel, right? Because one would think if you slaughter that many people and you go across the border, that Israel, that, thank God, has a pretty strong military, that there's going to be retaliation, right? So they were prepared. So I'm going to read this, right? So what was the multi-tiered defense? Of course, we know they had the tunnels, which only protects Hamas and their operatives. It's not a civilian city underneath, which we understand are hundreds of miles all over Hamas. And think about all the money they've used on that. That's supposed to go to their people. A plan to place Palestinians strategically so as to serve as human shields. It's a double war crime. They've even shot people trying to go to the safe areas that Israel has created to prevent them from getting from harm's way. Of course, Israel hostages to use as a bargaining tool. We see that play out. And remember, when we first met in the week as a community after October 7th, some of us spoke about, we knew this was coming. The understanding that the international community would call for a premature ceasefire while Israel continued to defend itself. And then lastly, the concept of lawfare that we saw played out at The Hague and South Africa, bringing Israel to the criminal court, the International Criminal Court. So now we're going to take a look at some pictures on the ground. So the first stop outside of listening to some people lecturing was the city of Sderot. What was so surprising to me, if you know Israel at all, I thought that most of the carnage took place near the border. Sderot is about 18 kilometers from the border. They got that far that day. So I showed that as a ghost town, right? 47 people were killed. We heard from a woman in, I couldn't tell, I think it was a bomb shelter, community center, preschool, clearly underground. This was a former resident of Sderot that has come back because, as she says, and she said to us, like Herzog, go back and tell the true story. She saw more than one killing, but in particular, that I recall, a 13-year-old naked young girl in the street shot in the head. She was a first witness, a first account witness. She was right there, and she told the story. And she said to us, as you may know, that we've talked a lot about displaced Palestinians are in the news, and there are, unfortunately, for them. There are 120,000 Israelis that are displaced, about 80,000 on the southern border and about 40,000, I think, on the northern border. As you know, there's a lot of activity with Hezbollah. She's traumatized, as you can imagine. And she came to speak to us, but she said, I'm not sure if I can go back home in Sderot and live here. This was our next stop. This was on the border. The kibbutz was called Nir Oz. That's me. What you see, and we were told at that point, before I got off the bus, that we had to wear flak jackets and we should put our helmets on because it was right on the border. We did hear a lot of artillery. The artillery was going towards Gaza. But on that day, you may recall, Israel pulled out about 100,000 soldiers from northern Gaza because this is reserves. The economy is devastated, and they needed to get back home for the economy, and they're fighting in this horrible war, et cetera. And the U.S. administration, let alone the rest of the world, you got to calm it down. It can't be as intense. You got to watch for civilians, something that Israel does more than any other army in the world to try and protect civilians. But anyway, so this house after house looked like this. It's not one, it's not two, it's not three. Virtually the whole kibbutz looked like this, totally burned out. We walked upon a crib in one of the houses. Now, I think there were 51 killed. Most of you know what a kibbutz is. It's like a commune. This is the vestige, perhaps, of socialist Israel. People who live in kibbutz, they share the land, they work the land together, they cook together, sometimes they care for each other's children, etc. Probably the most left-wing Israelis live near the border in kibbutzim. The person who toured us, his family, he spoke in a monotone, and you could tell it was like cathartic for him. So imagine going through every house, and he says, oh, the Feldman family lived here, and the mother was killed, and the father was wounded, and the children were kidnapped. He would go through house to house, and he knew exactly who lived there, his family, and he'd been there for decades. So he's telling in this kind of monotone, they lived here, they lived there, they lived there. And this one got killed, and this one got tortured, and whatever. He said that the kibbutz was 95% heaven and 5% hell. He wasn't referring to October 7th. He was just living there. And the 5% hell was on occasion, there'd be rockets, directed at Gaza. But living there, he loved it. He had his roots there. They created, it was desert. And they created, you don't have a great feel for it. You might see that first fence is the fence, which is not very big. It didn't look to me very impressive. But right beyond it are fields that are being farmed, lush green fields right on the other side. And where that tree line is, the back tree line, the back tree line is Gaza. So it's right there. They're literally neighbors. In fact, people from this kibbutz were known to take Gazans to hospitals in Israel for treatment. They would shepherd Gazans over who could not be treated for serious illnesses, cancer, so forth, were taken by the people that lived there who were then murdered. On the right, that's not a cloud. That's smoke from artillery that came from the Israeli side that was dissipating at that point. But when I stood there, and you could maybe feel it now looking at it, lush green fields, it's so sad and so tragic. The Gazans could have been living in heaven. If they were peaceful neighbors like they had the opportunity in 2005, 2007, this could be what it looks like on the other side. Israel goes halfway around the world, goes to Africa and other countries to help with irrigation and agriculture. They would have been more than happy to help their neighbors. It wasn't to be. So this is where it really started to get, for me personally, intense. You would think the last one was intense, but there was something removed. I mean, you heard this man speak, it's burned out buildings, it's one after the other. So this was the site of the Nova Festival. Now, some of us in the room could remember going to outdoor concerts. I don't know, someone in the room might have gone to Woodstock. But a variety of outdoor events and concerts, love and peace. There was a sign in front in Hebrew that said, the privilege to love, the right to love, and sort of a motto of the festival. Now there's another sign in English that says, bring them home. But you come up and it's idyllic. It's trees, it's beautiful. You can envision they came, young people, to celebrate each other, stay overnight, they were intense, listen to music. 364 of them were murdered. And we heard news reports, right? At first it was Hamas knew there was a festival. They planned it because there was a festival on that day. There were 3,500 young people at the festival. But we heard, and I think the information had just come out, in interrogations of terrorists that they caught, they said, no, we didn't know. When we came across in trucks and motorcycles and paragliders, we were lucky, quote unquote, we were lucky to find these human sitting ducks. So when I saw this, again, if you look at something and you hear about it, but when you see pictures, this woman on the left in particular, I don't know, I hope you can see that smile of this departed soul. And the young man to the right, full of life, and this beautiful young woman, snuffed out on October 7th. It's, I think, about 3 kilometers, I think. I don't remember. It's pretty close, because as they were storming over, now they went as far as 18 kilometers. This was on their way. So, well, maybe you can see, he's wearing, I had a hat sitting on my shelf for about a year. It's Red Sox in Hebrew. And I only had one, but I figured I would pick somebody out that I wanted to give it to. And he really appreciated it. I wasn't sure. Do you want this? I said to him. So this was at a makeshift base, also not far from Gaza, and we were with 20 soldiers. We brought them dinner, and we had dinner with them in this base. An amazing conversation, but the first thing is, you know, Israel, one of the things that people say about Israel, that they're an apartheid state, right? Try to remember some of this, because I'm sure you hear this from certain people, that what you can say. The colors of the people in this outfit of 20 soldiers range from dark brown to white. They had in this outfit Bedouin soldiers were fighting, Israeli citizen Bedouins, Sephardic Jews who are typically dark-skinned. And I'll get to this guy, the commander of this group, who was a little late, shows up and he gets on a table. We're all sitting at this sort of picnic area right outside the base. And he stands up and it looks like he has sort of a shaved head and his helmet on. And I'm looking, and sure enough, down the side of his ears, for those of you that know, it's payas. It's what Orthodox Jews wear as part of their hair. That's a sign of, I don't know exactly what a sign is, but I know they wear payas. And I was just sort of surprised. You know, here was a commander, and there's a lot of discussion in Israel that the Orthodox don't serve and so on. The modern Orthodox serve in great numbers. The Haredi, the more ultra-Orthodox, don't typically. And he isn't necessarily ultra-Orthodox, but I was surprised to see that. So this young man, 36 years old, is a civil engineer in Tel Aviv. And his commitment and devotion to the country, it was the first time I really spoke to someone that wasn't a speaker or wasn't talking about horror. He was your average Israeli serving in the military at 36. And his sense, his bravery, and his sense of country, he said to me, you know, and after Hamas, we have to go after Hezbollah. That feeling of insecurity and not wanting this to ever happen again. And then he takes out his wallet, and I think I asked him, actually, not his wallet, his phone, and he shows me his family, his wife, and 3 daughters. And I'm saying, how can this guy say to me that essentially he's ready to go fight on the northern border and he has this at home? This is his family. You know, I almost would think he would say, well, I can't wait to get home. He didn't say that at all. He talked about going back to work as a civil engineer. I said, what do you do? He goes, he said, that's not work. That's like the cream, the frosting on the cake. Life, that life, and his work is not work. This is work. This is what he does for his country. That's not work. He did also indicate, which surprised me a little bit, that he, in the midst of their horrors, is aware of the rise of anti-Semitism around the world, in the United States, in Europe in particular, and he felt a kinship. It's almost as if Israelis don't recognize that what we're going through, it seems that way, and they used to feel very differently, but there was a sense that we're in the same boat a little bit. God forbid, but there's a lot that we have to deal in this country, and he understood it. This is the 1-year-old who was captured, a red-headed baby. And on the right, we were in front of, actually, it was a community center where we all released red balloons. A 1-year-old hostage. His name is Kafir Bibas. We still don't know his condition. So I'm going to talk a little bit here. You know, it was difficult to decide how many slides, how much to talk about, how much to reflect. And the audience is mixed. A lot of you have been to Israel, have lived in Israel. So it wasn't that easy to figure that out. Karen Robinson helped me here a lot, so did Melissa Stern. I just wrote something. It's a little long. It gives you more details. We're going to put it out probably the next day or two about everyone, pretty much everyone we saw. So in Jerusalem, we met with the CEO of the Mizrahi World Union. His name is Rabbi Doron Perez. He was pretty incredible. He didn't say this off the bat, but I'll tell you the story he told after a little while. He has 2 sons. One son was wounded and captured, kidnapped on October 7th. They don't know his status. The other son is also in the military. And prior to October 7th, he planned a leave 10 days later, October 17th, to get married. So the family is facing, well, what do we do? How can we get married? How can he get married? They went ahead with it. And in his words, he called it the, what did he say? He said it was the holiest, saddest, happiest wedding. And he talked a little bit about Jewish history. We all know this, right? He talked about Passover. You know, we eat bitter herbs, and then we start having a good time. Or we always recognize the pain, right? I mean, that's our history. And he didn't feel that life is so precious that we should stop living. That his son had this planned. He probably had to go right back to the military. They were going to get married. And in the midst of this, you know, wonderful simcha, they have the pain. They don't know what's happening with his brother. So this sense of strength and resilience of the Israeli people you see over and over again. But he said some other interesting things, and this, I think, relates to, each of us can think about it, right? He said, you cannot prevent, but you cannot conceive. And he added, kind of along the same lines, we are often blinded by what we see, not what we don't see. As you think about the Yom Kippur War, eerily, almost 50 years exactly to October 7th on another Jewish holiday, they couldn't conceive in either war They couldn't conceive Hamas would do this. They would be so bold as to go across the border, knowing, as we said before, the degree of retaliation they could expect. They couldn't really conceive of it. As in the Yom Kippur War, they couldn't conceive that the armies would attack them. But it is sort of, interesting. He said terrorists or extremists pick one truth, and think it's the only truth. I mean, I started thinking about those things I feel very strongly about. Can it be the only truth? It's the truth as I see it. Maybe it's the most important truth. I was talking to Karen about something related to business, which, and I'm going to tell it. I think you can relate to this, right? So I have a business relationship with someone, and there's a loan that they're paying me back with nice terms, right? But the person I gave the loan has skipped maybe actually it'll be 4 payments this week. And we're friends, so I said, I feel like maybe you're taking advantage of the friendship. Well, he became very offended, which I felt immediately guilty about because it's a friend. But he began to describe how good the terms are in this particular loan. He was speaking that truth. His truth, you're doing really well. This is great. I said, yeah, but you're about 4 months late on payment. And he repeated what a good deal was. I said, a deal is a deal, isn't it? Now, I think that illustrates 2 truths. He was right. He gave me a good deal. But I was also right. We had terms. You're supposed to pay me on the 1st of every month. It's an example about how there can be 2 truths. You may hear from people, oh, the poor Palestinians are dying, they're civilians, it's terrible. That's a truth. Yeah, it is true. It is horrible. But does that mean you have a ceasefire? Does that mean that's Israel's fault? Should you let it continue and go back to the same rules of the game before? Because you have a truth. People are dying. And your truth is even that in raw numbers, there are more Palestinians dying. That's a truth. But does that make it the right course of action and the predominant overriding truth? And I think that's an example. You can see, yes, people have truths. He made an interesting comment about, as we know, there were major divisions in Israel about judicial reform. The country was being pulled apart. That demonstrations, 6 figures, 100,000 people in Tel Aviv Square, week after week. But he said, the idea that everyone came together on this. There was a unity of people. 360,000 reservists came together. I'm actually looking for the exact quote. He said, one of the things, think about this, right? He said that it doesn't matter who's at the reins of the ship if the ship is cracked. That was pretty profound, right? It could be the left, the right, the center, but if the country isn't unified, we have a real problem, and that was his point. He ended by saying we can't despair, we must have hope, and he said it's in the DNA of the Jewish people to rise up and build up as our country, our nation did after the Holocaust. This guy whose son is kidnapped and the other one getting married, and they're both in conflict. The last speaker we saw and heard from is a woman named also Perez, interestingly, Miriam Perez. She's an Israel Prize laureate. She is called in Israel the mother of sons. She lost 2 sons in 2 different conflicts. She's a woman probably in her 70s. One son she lost in Lebanon, the other one she lost previously in Gaza. She visited every hostage family at this point, every one, to provide comfort, to share the experience, to be there for them, to show up. She wrote a book, in fact, about kindness and chesed. She said that is what got me through it, to focus on what my life's purpose is. How can I help other? I have this horrible loss. And she went through the pain. It's not as if she went right through being kind is gonna, you know, you're gonna be able to avoid the pain. No, she didn't do that. This was after talking a lot about the pain. And she talked a lot about gratitude for what she has, like I mentioned before with the soldier and others. You know, Israel, this is shocking if you haven't seen this. The Israeli people ranked year after year in the top 5 of the happiest people in the world. That to me was more than counterintuitive. How could that be? They live with a sense of purpose, of meaning in their lives, something that we all kind of strive for and have to seek. It's in their face. Their country is their meaning, their purpose, their neighbors, their families. They all go to the military. Their families went through, some of them Holocaust and others, and their own Holocaust. So my reaction at the end, the very last speaker, we were going to have dinner and share some reflections and then go to the airport. After hearing her, I had tears in my eyes and I went to a corner of the room. Just, you know, I don't know, for a guy, for anyone, sometimes having tears in your eyes is very personal. And I got on my phone and I texted my family and told them how much I loved them. We have a gift, right? We're all here, we're alive. And I'm back, and I hope that tonight, what you read and how you feel, to think very specifically, and specifically could be in conversations with your neighbors and friends when you hear something. Like I was sitting in a restaurant and someone leaned, this was soon after October 7th, someone that I knew not all that well said, you know, it's very complicated what's happening. And I said, it's not really complicated. It's sad, it's tragic, but it's not complicated where the truth is and what Israel has to do moving forward. And this last quote I'll leave you with is, I read it today, and it was somewhat related to what's happening in soldiers, and US soldiers getting killed. But it relates so closely what's happening to Israel and the criticism. Is the point of the response is not to even the score, it is to end the contest. Israel has to end the contest. The rest of the world be damned, because that's what you've seen is what they're prepared to do, in their own words, over and over again. So thank you for your attention. We can do some Q&A.
I just wanted to make sure this was working.
Marty, I just want to thank you for that. It seems like you had a really emotional experience, and we can all feel everything, feel the emotion from everything you're saying. I'm almost in tears myself. I just wanted to ask if you had the opportunity to meet with any of the hostages' families, and if so, what was that like?
The only one was the rabbi whose son was hostage. We did not have meetings with hostages. You know, that's a little bit of the pull in Israel, as you can imagine. If you follow it, you have the hostage families who are saying, we need to do everything we possibly can to get them back. And of course, Israel's a military. They live by the motto, you don't leave anyone behind. So that's part of the ethos. On the other hand, well, I said what I said. I mean, okay, and the leadership is saying the way we get the hostages back is by eradicating and putting pressure on Hamas, which we see sort of works. But, you know, they're in tunnels somewhere. They're near the leader of Hamas, probably. It's, but the country, right, this soldier that I showed in that picture, we've got to get rid of them. So, no, we didn't.
Does anyone else have a question?
Comment?
Or comment?
Eddie?
By any chance, did you see any of the photographs or the videos I guess a lot of the Hamas had the cameras on them and stuff. Did you get to see those, or they keep those kind of personal?
No, we didn't see them. I mean, some of you may have seen them on the internet. You might be able to find them. I don't know. They've kept it pretty close to the vest and have showed it strategically to journalists, to other groups, to diplomats. I think, you know, out of respect to the families, they're not widely dispersing those videos. I've seen enough images that, you know, it doesn't take too much to imagine. Pretty shocking about, and some of the images were kind of post-rape and reading about rape and broken bones, and obviously the silence of some of the women's groups is deafening.
Any other questions?
Dennis over here.
Oh, hold on. I'm over here, if that's okay.
No, sorry.
Marty, thank you for your insights. What I wanted to know is whether you got a sense of how safe it might be to go to Israel if someone were to want to go and travel around to see family members all over. Did you get any sense at all about whether this is a good time to go, not so good, wait a year?
Well, I went, and my biggest concern, again, was the long flight. So they still have a capability from Gaza to shoot some rockets and some weapons. There's no question they're not done yet in the south. When I was nowhere else in the country, we were in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and then south to Gaza. Didn't see anything. But on the northern border, I didn't say much about Hezbollah. They have a huge stockpile of weapons and more precision-guided weapons, and they are more dangerous. Do I think they're going to really get into the conflict beyond what they're doing? Again, just from my perspective, I don't think so. But we see, you know, 3 Americans killed by Iranian proxies, the Houthis. I mean, I don't know. But I didn't feel unsafe at any point.
If I could add, you were able to go out to dinner one night with some...
Karen's brother and son.
Yeah.
Yeah, her nephew.
So just to that point, I mean, he was able to venture out. He one night free and was able to venture out with people who live there, and you guys went to a regular restaurant, right, in Tel Aviv or
Yes,
something?
of course. Before we went, they said to us, you know, when you go out, you're on your own. You're not with the guard that's staying with the group. She seemed more interested in the buffet table and protecting us, but she was there with a gun. But yeah, I mean, that's a personal decision, and I...
Did anyone talk about Truman's speech after Potsdam to the Japanese?
No, but go ahead, Dennis, share some of it. But no, they did not.
Well, I think it's worth everyone taking a look at it on YouTube, because this is where Truman warned the Japanese that they had to make an absolute surrender. And of course, what he was trying to do was to protect 400,000 American soldiers. And this was the first time he delivered it was before Hiroshima. And then he repeated it after Hiroshima. And of course, it took until Nagasaki before the Japanese did that. But that's what our democratic president decided was necessary. And I've often thought that what happened on October 7th was identical to what happened at Pearl Harbor. And there's a great parallel between them.
Interesting, yeah. Anyone else? Yep.
It seems clear from the news reports we get in the United States that Israel is losing the PR war with the rest of the world. And that could potentially affect the solution at the end or how quickly it occurs. Was there any discussion about that when you were there?
Yes.
Can you share it?
A little bit, and we did see one of the sessions I had. We were 2 young bloggers who were pounding away at social media and the Israel messaging. I think it was the Minister of Diaspora Affairs that was also talking to us about their efforts in that regard in terms of media. I think it was the young guys, it may have been, no, I think it was the ministry. They said in terms of the major social media outlets, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, he claimed was 50-50. The worst, driven by China, because they own it, and they own the algorithms, is TikTok. And TikTok is now somewhat pervasive as a source of information. So that we heard. Listen, there are, how many Jews in the world? 15 million? There are 1.5 billion Muslims. Why do we think a lot of what's being spewed on college campuses? You just scratch the surface, and it's Qatari money, or it's other money from the Middle East. You can't undo some of that, and frankly, it's been percolating for a long time. You know, in this country anyway, it gets caught up in all kinds of politics. And, you know, free speech. At the moment, the State Teachers Association, and in the city of Somerville, did you see that the other day? Why would the city of Somerville vote on a ceasefire? Why would they think that's their purview to do that? Why would the Massachusetts Teachers Association do that? I don't want to go too far down that line because I could ramble on and on about some of the problems here, but yeah, it's very tough. They're trying. The odds are stacked against them, but they're going to do, I think, what they have to do. The most important is the United States. And there was, you know, praise for Biden. Kept the munitions flowing, ships off the coast, hasn't stopped Hezbollah, but maybe stopped them in more of a major way. There was appreciation. The fact, you just think about, Biden is in a re-election campaign. He's worried about voters in Michigan. The voters in Michigan, it's a large Palestinian and Muslim population. He's trying to thread a needle. But by and large, the Israelis feel pretty good. I guess they're worried about worse, but he's been pretty good. So it's a tough one, and it's going to be ongoing, but they don't ignore it. Yeah, Bob.
Yes, you went into areas where many people, many Jewish people were murdered. And I was going to ask you, what was that like for you? And were the people running things over there, how did they try to prepare people, or did they try to prepare people to experience what they were going to experience?
You mean our group?
Yeah.
No, not really. I mean, we knew where we were going. We had a sense before we went what we might experience. So, you know, we were somewhat prepared. I didn't see people breaking down, per se. I think there was some quiet crying and tears, but it wasn't that much out in the open. Yeah, they didn't really prepare us before we went, but we knew what we were getting into. Anything else? Jennifer.
Thanks, Karen. I'm just curious whether you met people who lived down on the border areas there. Where are they now, all these displaced people? And is there any sense of when they're going to get to go back or what their plans are? Did they talk about that?
Well, we did make one stop at, it's called the Maccabi World Union. And the JCC association with the Maccabi games at Marblehead used to be big players, or sort of affiliated in JCCA, but it's also games for adults. It's all over the world. And they have a really nice campus. I think it's on the outside of Tel Aviv, and they have a hotel. And Maccabi World Union gave the hotel all over to displaced people. A lot of them are in hotels, dormitories. They're all over the country. They're spread out, and a lot of people have relatives, right? And Israel, the size of country that it is. There was not yet, and then talking about trauma, that woman in Sderot certainly said, I don't know if I want to come back. So who knows? And the person at the kibbutz also like, who knows? We want to rebuild it. We want to come back, but who knows? It's a real struggle with the economy, of course, as I said. People out of work, people displaced, people that need to be fed. I mean, it's a pretty small country to deal with this. So, yeah, we didn't go in depth, but.
How do we help from here if we
All right.
can't go there?
Well, again, as I said, I just think conversations. I think be willing to stand up. This is a moment in time. It's a critical moment. The anti-Semitism that we're facing, the threats, and if I listened and said about hope, there is some hope. I mean, you mentioned Truman. I mean, one thing that could happen, I think more of what happened from Lebanon when Arafat and his gang left. Maybe at one point they're going to have to allow Sinwar and some of the others to survive, but they're going to be deported. And unfortunately, Israel is going to have to come in and manage Gaza to, at some point, you know, I don't know what, I don't know who takes over and what happens. I would ask all of you also to try and make a connection for me. I want to do this. I feel it's important for me to take this on the road to non-Jewish groups, maybe college students, certain aspects of Salem State, where I taught for a little while, are not that receptive. But there, I think we know of teachers, individual classes that are maybe dealing with the Middle East. Endicott College, somewhere. I'm going to take a bodyguard on campus. I'm not joking. I'm not going to go by myself. But I want to go. So if you know groups, people, small groups, churches, I'm going to be interviewed tomorrow by The Current, which I think people are reading. And I'm sure, what's the other paper I need to? I think we have a contact here, John's paper. The Weekly. Yeah, I mean, but you got to say to yourself, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to speak up, and I'm going to become more educated. You know, I have the feeling when I did this, a lot of people in the room knew most of these facts. And that's okay, but there are a lot of people who don't. They don't know that Israel left completely in 2005, left Gaza. They don't know what they did to people. Last slide was on my last night in Jerusalem. And it's just beautiful at dusk. And if you haven't been, go again if you have been. Everyone, thank you for coming.